if we're working with perfectionism like we were last week, that we might have developed a really fixed mindset in terms of limited beliefs about how important it is to always know what's expected so that we can always control meeting those expectations for the purposes of that validation that we need to chronically, elicit from the world as the authority, who then gets to act as the proof and evidence that we are on track, right? That we're showing up to the expectations and that means that we're good enough. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, the Legacy Edition, where conscious leaders unite to unlock their highest potential so collectively we can change the way the game is being played. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, changing the way this game is being played. And Tracey Allen and I are back one-on-one for another one of our riffs. This is where we get so excited to pull the curtains back and really start to play with some of my expertise in and around conscious leadership. So I am dying to know what you've got cooked up for me today, Trace. Where are you taking us and our folks?
Yeah, so I thought maybe we would pick up from when we left off on last week's pod, where you gave us all a little bit of homework to go away and take a look at our red flag emotions and where they're showing up and kind of take note of them and get a little bit curious around what they mean to us and what we think they might mean. So hopefully people had a chance to do that this week. And I thought what would be really fun is that if you could, I'll give you a little bit of what I'm seeing on the play in terms of, in terms of my people even.
Yeah, let's use that.
And yeah, let's go into that. And then maybe you can share with us, what would you do if you were that person or experiencing that? What would you give them in terms of recommendations as a coach and the work that you do in terms of unpacking that? So I think if we think about what I'm seeing is a lot of like uncertainty and people very, very concerned about where they fit, where they're going. And that's coming up in terms of like stress, right? So in their day to day, they're getting, triggered very quickly. Emotions are coming up. They're not, able to really kind of like stay in control of their emotions and kind of stay calm and get what needs to get done because they're getting triggered. So hard to know what that is for everybody. I think everybody has their own experiences and beliefs that are bringing that to them. But what we are seeing across the board is that is kind of something that with the uncertainty, Q4, people are pumping hard, trying to get through. And there's just a lot of pressure. So when the pressure's up, that's when you start seeing these red flag emotions come a lot easier than in the normal play. So I would say, what could you help us with in terms of unpacking that? Like, what is the next step? Knowing I've taken note of it, I see when it happens, I've recognized it, I've tried to like understand it a bit more about what's causing that. And then I would love to know like where you would guide us next in terms of what are the next steps we can do to try to unpack that.
I love it. Let's pick up with where we left off essentially last time on the play, right? Because we sent our folks out the door to actually do that inner work. And yeah, this is the same inner work that we're challenging our leaders to do right now as their amygdalas are getting triggered by the uncertainty. So I think the place to start is obviously where we left off with curiosity. And then remembering that cranking the high beams on our curiosity is what awakens our conscious mind, right? That's where we're actually able to process our way through the backstories of what all of this is pulling out of our mindset, right? In terms of beliefs and values we were talking about last time. So I think if this were one of my leaders walking through the door, in fact, I've had a lot of these leaders walking through my door this week with this very symptomology. And yeah, you mentioned that the uncertainty that your people were experiencing was in and around their job roles, like the future of their job security, essentially, in terms of where they're currently at in their career. So yeah, I think that's where we start with our curiosity, right? Is like, if that is the situation contextually that your people are talking about, as they're feeling stressed and anxious, then it's really challenging our people to step back from that equation. We like to say in the conscious leadership arena, getting up in the box with it, right? So we have that higher level, not only elevation, but expansive cognitive capacity. And I think that's where we want to go with our curiosity, is really starting to get up in the box with what might be true about uncertainty in and around the future security of my job, of my position, in order for me to feel stressed about that. And I think that's where inevitably, and correct me if I'm wrong, our people start giving us the backstories of proof and evidence. So just as a reminder and a primer for anybody listening who didn't catch that earlier pod this summer, when we were talking about belief systems, since this is what we're looking to unpack, let's just remember that belief systems are our brain taking in all these experiences at some point along the way and having to create meaning out of that, right? Needing to decide in those moments of having those experiences if that situation represented pain or if that situation represented pleasure. In other words, was it safe or was it not safe? And then those, emotional associations of pain and pleasure are essentially what gets hardwired back here as a neural pathway, right? So that we can create this autopilot part of our experience where we're able to govern future decisions towards or away from the things that are going to keep us safe and alive, because that's the brain's job. And this essentially is how the brain is doing its job. So we know that if it's in there and if it's being triggered, that it's a belief system that has been established at some point in our backstory. So we need to look for that proof and evidence, because that is essentially what upholds those belief systems. And if we're remembering that belief systems are like tabletops, right? They need these legs of proof and evidence in terms of these experiences that get stored in our memory bank, in order to hang on, right? And to be so strong in our experience. Then ultimately, yeah, we want to make sure that we can help our people to illuminate as much of that proof and evidence in their backstory as possible, because that's when they're really going to be able to see what we see in that, which is this very limited perspective, right? Because essentially, I know we've done this work before, but we talked about it a little bit on the last podcast. A lot of these belief systems are going down pre-10 years old, right? And so I was talking to one of my leaders about that this morning, in fact, because he was hitting a lot of instability with his team right now. And yeah, we were just talking about how limited our perspective is when we're pre-10 years old. We said last time that we're completely unconscious. We're in this sponge-like state, but we also are kind of looking through a peek hole perspective because we're so young. Our experience is so limited. And because we're dependents, oftentimes, with that limited frame, that's why those belief systems that are modeled for us in our environment get so deeply lodged and ingrained in our experience. So I think this is really important, is that we help our clients to understand that that's where that belief system was created, and also understand that that is not the full story. That's fallible data, right? If it's coming from a limited perspective and thus context, then we know there's a lot more to that story that could possibly illuminate an entirely different meaning. And therein lies the opportunity for growth. We said that that's what red flag emotions are. That's why we want to have this type of relationship with them, in terms of curiously looking for those landmines proactively in our day-to-day autopilot, right? Is because, there's a lot of power when all of that is understood in our conscious adult experience. How often, I want to hear from you now, when you're talking to your folks and you're just getting curious in terms of like why there's uncertainty in regards to their job security. And then you hear this backstory of how, it was so important for that track to be laid out so that they understood what was expected of them. I mean, all the way through the schooling years. And obviously, because we haven't gone back to look at any of that hardwiring in our mindset, gets perpetuated into our working years, right? And so it makes sense that if we're working with perfectionism like we were last week, that we might have developed a really fixed mindset in terms of limited beliefs about how important it is to always know what's expected so that we can always control meeting those expectations for the purposes of that validation that we need to chronically, elicit from the world as the authority, who then gets to act as the proof and evidence that we are on track, right? That we're showing up to the expectations, and that means that we're good enough. Because that's what we said perfectionism is. It's a shame-based strategy. High achievers never want to accept that, right? Because we don't want people to know we've got shame in the backyard, right? That can, even in and of itself, be a really cataclysmic moment, right? When they understand, holy crap, like my example I was using with my client this morning is, when I learned how to do this work and I shuttled back to my pre-10-year-old self, and I remember sitting on my couch in my living room with my dad, and I'm beaming with pride because I got 99% on a test, and he was like, "What happened to the 1%, Susan?" And then we got to resonate on that in terms of how that child would feel. What would be the meaning ascribed to that for that child? Well, obviously that child would believe that they are inherently not good enough, that they're not measuring up. And so I want to hear from you, like oftentimes when you explain to your leaders that like that's fallible data, because ultimately you're just a kid trying to show up to your parents' expectations. But we're parents now. We know what that actually means. It had nothing to do with our worth. Now that I'm a mother myself, I can see what my dad was trying to tee up for me. He saw that excellence in me, and he was trying to set a high bar because he thought that's how he was going to push me to excellence, right? But ultimately, once we're able to see it through that adult context and much more expansive perspective, it changes the meaning. We know now that that's not what that meant. It didn't mean I wasn't good enough. It meant that, if anything, he was validating how good I was and how much potential I actually had.
I know myself really well. You need to actually start asking questions. They haven't made any of those connections. So you're like, well, I'm not sure that's really knowing yourself, right? But people do want to get to know yourself. And it's a really hard thing to do if you don't have the tools. Because I've tried, you can, try to write down what you like, write down what you don't like. That's not getting to know yourself. It's getting to know what you like and don't like. It's not really about how belief systems reform and why you're showing up in the way that you're showing up, and why, pain and pleasure are associated with different thoughts. That's deeper work than just getting to know, do you know yourself?
But I want to hear from you when you're asking your leaders about this stuff and you're trying to get them curious in terms of where that evidence lies in their backstories. Like, what is it that you're observing in terms of what's presenting itself, right? When they actually start to get consciously aware of the fact that not only are these beliefs disrupting them and affecting their adaptability and resiliency when things get a little uncertain, but is it easy for them to dismiss once they understand that limited perspective and they understand where that's coming from and how that wasn't the intention? What is it that you're observing happens in their experience? I'd love to hear from you in terms of when you're doing this with your actual folks. Are they surprised? Is it freeing for them? Is it energizing for them to understand that they, have a whole new aspect of truth that they can play with? What are you observing?
Yeah, I think that the most common one is surprise. I really do think that a lot of people, and I was like the same a few years ago, actually don't make the correlation of the beliefs being born, kind of show up for us through our childhood that then forms how we think and how we perceive things. I really, when I do walk through it with some people, that is the most common thing, is that I never thought of it that way. I actually never made that correlation that that is what was happening. And now I see what you're saying. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So then that usually, for me anyway, what I've seen is it gets them really deep and curious. Then it's like they're excited about, what else can I learn about myself? Because it is about learning about yourself. right? Which we all say, oh, a lot of people say, oh, I know myself really well. You actually start asking questions, they haven't made any of those connections. So you're like, well, I'm not sure that's really knowing yourself, right? But people do want to get to know yourself. And it's a really hard thing to do if you don't have the tools. Because I've tried, you can, try to like write down what you like, write down what you don't like. That's not getting to know yourself. It's getting to know what you like and don't like. It's not really about how belief systems reform and why you're showing up in the way that you're showing up and why, pain and pleasure are associated with different thoughts. That's deeper work than just getting to know, do you know yourself? So for me, I've always like, when I do it, the people just kind of go, oh my gosh, that makes total sense. Now I understand that. And then it just becomes so exciting for them because then it's about uncovering more about that and trying to really kind of get to understand why this is happening and why they react in certain ways. And I even do it like I do it with people at work, but a little less. I do it a lot with my friends because you can have more deeper, longer conversations. And like we talk a lot about, why we feel a certain way about certain topics. And then we dig a little bit more about, some of the things and we know each other so we can call each other out on, well, I think your parents kind of talked about that. And then we like, oh my God, yeah. So then it's like, then at that point, it just becomes really fun because then you can actually start doing the work yourself. And you can, if you want to spend the time, you can actually, make those correlations. And sometimes they're not like easy because I think we also shut out a lot of things that we don't want to remember about our childhood if it was painful, right? I think so I think you can hit the surface on your own, which is really fun. But then as you want to go deeper, I think you need someone to hold a mirror and help you ask those questions for sure. I would say surprise and excited. Surprise is first and then the excitement comes after, which really gets the momentum going on the discovery piece, which is fun.
Yeah, I think this is exactly what I observe is that once they get a taste for how powerful a strategy that can be for regulating their state, especially if they're coming through the door, like my client presented this morning, right? Where they're just so destabilized and they just feel so powerless, right? It's not a good time for that human being. That's why we have so much compassion for our high achievers right now, getting disrupted like that, And yes, I think a lot of times that can cause us, to self-sabotage even more because we feel so powerless. So to give them the ability in a couple of minutes to understand how to pivot their perspective and actually feel viscerally the shift in their emotional response, I feel like it's the medicine, They're getting a taste of that medicine in terms of like, oh my gosh, this is everything that I'm desiring to feel right now. And I'm actually in control of that. If they walk through the door thinking they're completely out of control because of everything happening around them, and then you put them into the cockpit with that and show them how to take themselves into a better space and place, that is super empowering, right? And so that becomes infectious. In terms of, we've now moving them out of fear and back into their creative capacity where all that new choice lives. And that to me is not only such a gift, but yeah, it's pretty contagious, like this is something that they're going to want to play with more and more. And then once they start to see that ripple effect of how all of that shows up, like my client this morning, he's going to see all of that stabilize his team for damn sure. And then I'm going to ask him about it next week and he's going to be like, let's go. Yeah. Because he's a new client and I'm still making the case for why you should want to get into practice with these tools and strategies, which is the hardest part with high achievers as we know. Yeah. So to me, that's what I always want them to be in the experiential practice of these strategies, because this is what's so different about the mindset as an entry point, especially as it pertains to how I'm leading myself. We want to go to this step of depth. So when we're looking for our backstories, don't stress if you can't get all the way back to pre-10 years old. Like I'm talking about that with you because you've done the work and I've done the work, and we know ultimately the goal is to get to the epicenter in terms of the origin story. But if you're my
Mhm.
client this morning and this is the first time you're trying to play with this stuff, like maybe it's just pulling out proof and evidence from your week, which is exactly what I did for him. I was just like, just tell
Mhm.
me where those red flags are going off. And then I use that as an entry point, right? To get him to just even use those recent memories of
Mhm.
experiential contextual evidence, right? And again, this is what takes it from just an intellectualized thing that they're learning, which is like a lot of how leadership development goes down. And it's actually getting them into the subconscious mind where the emotion lives, where they're able to like really visualize that experience again, which we know pulls all of that back into play in their nervous system. And that's why you don't want to skip the practice part of this, because we need to get to that step of depth in our body in order to actually experience the integration of the change. So we can get to that point where we see our behavior is different, our team sees our behavior is different, and now we're seeing a totally different result. But I just don't want our folks, if they're out there thinking, oh yeah, pre 10 years old, like this is why I didn't go to therapy, because high achievers,
Yeah.
they don't want to think about this stuff they're trying to run away from, it's I don't want to add more pressure to the mix.
Mhm.
So I think it's okay if our leaders are listening out there, is just use some contextual examples. That's why I said, just keep a list next to you on your desk. Like just bank where you notice all of those red flags going off. And then you'll have a list of all the different experiences contextually from that week before that you can then start to pull into play here in this practice. And then you can actually start to do that deeper work, right? Based on proof and evidence that's actually right in front of you on your desk.
Mhm.
you know?
And I think one of the things that I know you might go into this, but one of the questions that I always remembered that was part of my homework was,
Mhm.
what is the truth about
Mhm.
what you are feeling and what is happening?
Mhm.
And that, when you ask yourself that question and you're thinking about, like, I don't know, oh, I'm really not good at my job. Everybody thinks I'm not good. When you ask yourself, is that really the truth?
Mhm.
When you ask yourself that question, you're going to see that, is it really, like, write down everything that I am good at? Like, then you start realizing that's a belief. That's
Mhm.
not the truth. And that's where you start building, the case to say, this is not the truth. And this is a belief that needs to be reframed so that
Mhm.
I can continue on my path.
Mhm.
So I'm sure there's other questions, but that one for me always resonated because it was
Mhm.
always where it would take me out. When I had
Mhm.
enough proof and evidence, I could actually come out of that and shift my energy and perspective and
Mhm.
then show up in a much more fabulous way instead of being
Yeah. Yeah.
buried somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's use this contextual example with my client this morning in terms of that pivot, as you're referring to, because I think I went through those steps relatively quickly and took us up in the box to that more empowering perspective. But that's what you're referring to here. So if we're new to this work and all of a sudden we have banked on our little piece of paper here, right, that things really went off the rails this morning in our all hands with our team, and oh my gosh, I'm in such a tailspin. My insecurity is so ripe, right? Like all of that stress and anxiety that occurs as a reaction, not a response, like an automatic reaction to his team all of a sudden not being happy with his performance. It wasn't him keeping the room perfectly pleased with him as the perfect leader. And obviously, when we were able to pull all of that out of him in terms of that limited belief, the belief that he needs to be the perfect leader at all times in every single interface with his team, I think then I was able to pull him up in the box, and it was easy for me to ask him to challenge that, right? And ask him what is really true about the expectations for us as leaders. And with all that curiosity and all that consciousness, again, because that's what wakes up, then I was able to ask him, to really anchor into the proof and evidence as to, just what was true about him as a leader. And that's the hack, right? Because then they can start to think at a broader context in terms of beyond just that one moment of perceived failure, because they didn't perfectly control getting everybody's validation in the room. That's when he can actually start to practice intrinsic validation, right? Based on the evidence of his backstory as a leader. Why was he nominated to lead this team again? Oh yeah, what was that in his bag of tricks that he had in spades that obviously got him nominated for that opportunity? And what has he been able to do in his track record, right? Like, again, not because the world as the authority is validating that for him today, but no, because he was able to actually see the truth of all of that which was still inside of him, that he actually was still in control of. He just needed to remember how to access it. And that's the trick, right? Is like when we get into the conscious part of our experience, that's where we actually then can start to access more truth, because then we're out of the fear and back in alignment with our intuition, right? The smartest part of us that's able to actually intrinsically validate that, because it can actually calibrate all that proof and evidence in our backstory. But that is not accessible when we're in a red flag state, which is where this becomes so dangerous and problematic for our people to perpetuate, right?
Yes.
Because that's exactly what would have perpetuated if I didn't have that interface with that leader this morning. He has another big interface with his team on Monday, and that's why he was freaking out, right? And if he carried that insecurity all the way through his weekend and just continued to do what the brain does, right? Which is just continue to marinate on his perception of being a failure. There's only one way that that Monday meeting was going to go predictably, right? Is that if he hadn't interrupted that pattern, that insecurity would have gotten deeper, riper, and then he would have had even more proof and evidence to solidify his insecurity.
Exactly.
Right? And so I don't want to oversimplify this by just saying, yeah, just get up in the box and ask yourself what must be true instead. Like, you really got to contemplate that question. But again, from a space and place of really challenging yourself to see yourself. Right? Take that power back from the room. Take that power back from the world and stop giving it the authority in something that you need to be the authority in. A leader needs to be the expert in themselves in this way so that we can lead from presence, not powerlessness. And that's really the power of all of this in terms of conscious leadership, right? Is like, it just, I know we resonate on this. It's very challenging, you know, in terms of people's associations with doing this inner work, especially in the leadership development space. You know, it's like if you've done this from an intellectual standpoint and you've seen that it didn't yield benefit or results, right, then it can reinforce the wrong message. So I really want our leaders to just really put the emphasis on the practice. We have to make sure that we're running this drill experientially in order for us to really whet that appetite and really edify, right, this process of self-regulation. Because we said it so many times, and we're going to keep saying it on this podcast until everybody is just seeing this as best practices. But this is why emotional intelligence is 80% of potential. Is because this is game changer in terms of leaders' impact and influence, right? It's just how much capacity they have on a day-to-day level.
Absolutely. So with that, what would be, if we want to leave our guests with some homework, what is the next step in terms of, I think what I would think would be around, you know, what is the truth around some of the beliefs or some of the red flag emotions showing up for them, around what must be true about that, or what is the truth in that, and start making their list of what that looks like, right? So that they can really start getting, like you said, really getting connected to self and really taking a good look at who they really are.
So step one, we know, is how am I feeling? Finger on the pulse. Step two is why. That's where we start to find contextually all that evidence in terms of whatever the stressor is that's waking up the red flag emotion. Step 3, what might this mean? What might this mean is true about the situation that I'm describing out here? And that's where we actually pull it inside in terms of really starting to isolate and identify and thus illuminate consciously the limited belief, the limited perspective. And then step 4 is that really true? And see that look? That's curiosity, like, huh? And the second I start to get curious and question that, I start to step outside of all of that limited perspective into the point of observation with my curiosity, which we said activates my conscious resources. Now I'm back at the helm. Now I have my creative capacities available to me. Just even, is that true? And that's where we start to be able to challenge the proof and evidence contextually that is triggering all of that belief system. And then, I mean, we just said it. Once people actually get a taste of this and they can see, it's relatively easy to dismiss, right? Once we get up in the box with it, and then it's okay. So we see that that's no longer true. What must be true about this situation instead? And that's where we want to go practice that intrinsic validation and really practice seeing ourselves in terms of the truth of who we are, in our authenticity, in our sweet spot. And that oftentimes just even being able to ask that question is what helps us develop the much more empowering belief and thus perspective. And then we just want to really, use all that proof and evidence to anchor into that new empowering belief. The way I check in bed on the last step is just, how am I feeling now? And that just shows us if we have really completed that cycle in terms of that stress response. This is where our people are getting stuck, is in that upregulated sympathetic state, because they're grasping at straws. They can no longer control the external evidence that they need, right? To be able to feel that they want to feel, to be able to lead with max capacity. So if you get all the way to the end of this reframing practice and you're still feeling any of that, then you got to go back and make sure that you've really challenged all of that limited perspective enough. Sometimes we stop short of that goal line, and that's how you're going to know. Your nervous system is always giving you that feedback, that biofeedback in terms of whether or not you've been able to regulate that all the way through. And I should be feeling the way I want to feel to get back on the road, to be able to show up and lead well, because I'm in alignment again with the truth of knowing myself and knowing that I'm totally capable of being a great leader for my folks. So those are the
Love
steps.
it.
Yeah. And I think as that pertains, last thing is, like, as that pertains to values, I just want to make sure that all of our people, when they're doing that kind of excavation, are also just starting to see, where the limited beliefs are showing up. It's like, obviously, because we were valuing the wrong things. I was valuing pleasing everybody on my team at all times because I learned to believe that is a value. That was an expectation because that was linked to safety. But if I can challenge all of that and now start to pull my power back inside in terms of the truth of who I really am, then I think it's going to show you that new value too, right? Like, the value is no longer keeping my team happy at all times. In fact, that's not great leadership. There's a lot of times where we have to challenge our people's edges, right? We talked about feedback. Right? And so then it's like, okay, so what is the value? Obviously, I value excellence. Obviously, I want to show up and be the best leader I can possibly be. Okay, amazing. But that's something I can control, right? If it's excellence, I can ask myself every day, am I showing up and giving my people the best of what I got? And as long as I can control that effort and say yes, then I'm always going to be at the helm in a confident state as well, because my value systems are now intrinsically based as well. Just because we talked about that so much on the last show as it pertains to people's values, I just wanted to, we talked more about beliefs specifically today. I just wanted to pull that right back into this loop over the last 2 pods, is making sure that we're still trying to do that aspect of the deeper work too, because it's all connected.
Totally.
Anything else that you want to leave with our folks?
That's a lot.
I know.
I think that's a lot. So I love it. And hopefully people resonate with that. And I've done a lot of this work. So trust me, it works. You just have to do the practice. That's where the magic happens. It's not like listening to a pod and being able to understand it and apply it, without doing the work. It's just not going to work. So I wish you all an amazing week to try and figure that out and have fun with it. I think that's what we want for our people, right?
Yeah, that's definitely the fun of it, right? Is when you get to get back into your creative capacities and just play with these things.
Mm-hmm.
We dare you. Just go play with it for 1 week. This is us challenging your edges right now. Just go try it 1 week and then you can stop. My hockey coach is the last thing I'm going to leave with our peeps since we're resourcing them up and all this disruption and uncertainty. I used to have an Olympic level hockey coach who used to use this 5-minute rule with me. He was so good. He was the OG performance coach, this guy. And he used to say when we'd be complaining about getting down to the rink to do our extra workouts, because we had a 6 a.m. bike club one year. So we had to go down and ride the bike before freaking breakfast in class. And so, of course, we were making like excuses and grumbling about it. And he used to just say, just go for 5 minutes. That's all I expect. Just 5 minutes and then you can go back to bed. No problem. You think we ever got our butts down on those freaking bikes at the rink and got all sweaty warming up after 5? There's no way you're stopping at that point. You've already exerted all the energy and effort and you're already in your momentum. And that was the trick, It's like the 5-minute rule. Just use the 5-minute rule with this practice, and I think it'll be enough to keep you on that track. Because again, like we said today, it's the practice that makes the case and really solidifies why we are so fervent and passionate about this form of leadership development and training. So please hit us with that feedback. We're still in the year of co-creation. We want to celebrate you. We want to hear about the wins. We want to hear about how much fun this work is. And we obviously want to hear about the impact that this is having on your leadership. So for all other curiosity and around how you can come into this locker room and start to do a little bit of this deeper work, you could do that one-on-one with one of our, high performance leadership coaches, or we've got a lot of different awesome team trainings that we're running left, right, and center right now for our corporate folks and teams, because we were talking about that today too. You can find all of that information over at the website, elitehighperformance.com. Tracey, thank you so much for pulling all of this out of the well today. I know this is going to show up in service to everything that we know our people are fielding and navigating right now in real time. Thank you everybody for listening. Please, on your way out the locker room door today, hit like, hit subscribe, share this episode with a leader that is really going through the disruption right now. And we will see you right back here next week.